The build I will show you today is a level 150 mage that is an absolute boss destroyer. But even though it's a build with a PvE focus, it can still be used in PvP. The build is relatively easy to use, so I give it a 3 out of 5 in ease of use. Managing to use the right sorceries all the time is the only thing that's a little bit harder. If you want to recreate this build from a fresh start, pick Astrologer. You can get to decent strength relatively quickly by looting the Meteorite Staff and the Royal House Scroll. Turn in the scroll to Salon and get the Carrion Slicer. The Carrion Slicer is a very good sorcery to be viable early on. However, the main damage in the endgame you will deal with the Dark Moon Greatsword. The build is on the squishier side with its 40 vigor. Since the build is using a lot of spells, I leveled Mind to 34. I also kept Endurance on the lower side, since we are not using heavy armor. Strength and Dexterity I kept on the minimum requirements for the melee weapons you might want to use as a mage, so it's 16 Strength and 18 Dex. The main source of damage comes from the 80 Intelligence. Faith and Arcane I left at the base stats. If you want to tweak the stats, feel free to experiment, but don't expect the same damage as in the video. The main melee weapon of the build is the Dark Moon Greatsword, but this doesn't mean that there aren't good alternatives for the build. I also have the base stats for the Moonveil Katana. The Death's Poker is also a really good weapon for this build. Every time you freeze something with the poker or one of the spells you use, you can either take the plus 20% damage the enemy takes while it's frozen, or you can reset the frost effect by hitting the target with a flame-infused weapon. I like to use a Flame Art Misericord for that. The straight sword of my choice is the Broadsword, which I infused with the Ash of War Carrion Grandeur. The Broadsword in combination with Carrion Grandeur will put out a lot of DPS and a lot of poise damage as well. If you want to dual wield a weapon, I recommend the Grossmesser with Chilling Mist and a second one with Glint Blade Phalanx, both infused with magic. But there are many more viable weapons to use with this build, so feel free to try some of them out. I mainly use the Carrion Regal Scepter, since it is the best stuff for a high intelligent build without the effect of spells costing more mana. But in some cases I switch to Lusat's Glintstone Staff to get the extra damage. It is especially powerful if you use Carrion Slicer. To boost the damage even further, you can equip the Carrion Glintstone Staff in your other hand to boost the damage of the Carrion Slicer by another 15%. This will melt bosses and is the best damage you can deal with a straight sword moveset. I was already satisfied with the damage the build dealt, but you can increase the damage of certain spells even more if you equip a staff with a spell boosting effect in the offhand. This can boost some spells up to 15%. To maximize the damage while using the Dark Moon Greatsword, I use the Shard of Alexander, the Magic Scorpion Charm and the Godfrey Icon. And I also use the Graven Mass Talisman to boost my sorceries while I use the Greatsword. If I want to maximize the damage of sorceries, I only swap the Shard of Alexander with either the Graven Skull Talisman or with the Ritual Sword Talisman, depending on the situation. For the case you want to use the double Grossmesser, you should use the Rotten Winged Sword Insignia instead of the Godfrey Icon, and the Godskin Swaddling Cloth instead of the Graven Mass Talisman. For this build there are not that many other good talismans in Elden Ring, but you can still try to find an even better combination for your playstyle. If you liked the video so far, please consider subscribing. This will help my channel a lot, and I'm really thankful for it. Let's talk about the Physick. I normally use Magic Shrouding Cracked Tier and a Cerulean Hidden Tier to overpower bosses in the first few seconds of a fight. But if a fight cannot be dealt with quickly enough, I like to replace the Cerulean Tier with an Intelligence Not Crystal Tier for an extra 10 Intelligence, which boosts the damage slightly for 3 minutes. To manage all the sorceries, I have a specific order in which I attune them. The first spell is Carrion Slicer, which is perfect for high DPS when fighting a boss, but also really quick to use, which allows you to dodge the attacks of the boss. Then there is the Carrion Piercer, the only spell that can pierce through walls, which makes it perfect for PvP. But you can also use the charged version to stunlock most NPC invaders in the game. Next up is the Great Glintstone Shard, with a good damage to mana cost. Then the Glintstone Comet Shard for bigger foes. Always try to charge the Comet Shard. Next is Comet, with good damage but high mana cost. Always try to charge the Comet to get the extra damage while still using the same mana. Then I use Cannon of Haima, which is a really good spell for PvP, since it has an area of effect which deals full damage as long as your target is hit by the explosion. Also charge this one for more damage and a bigger area of effect. Next up is Loretta's Great Bow, which I only use for long range snipes. Also fully charge this one for more damage. Moving on to Glintstone Arc, the best spell to damage multiple enemies at once. Then I also use the Summer Ice Storm, really good for PvP and to weaken enemies by freezing them. Also charge this one. And finally, the buff spell Terra Magica, which raises all magic damage by 35% as long as you stay in the banner you create when casting it. There are many more spells, but those are my main spells I use for this build. Feel free to test out other combinations. I also use consumables that complement the build. Crystal darts are the best throwing knives for a mage since they scale with a B with intelligence. I also use explosive stones so I can reset the freeze effect I procced on enemies from afar. Magic pots complete the offensive consumables I use. I also use warming stones to restore low amounts of health to get back to full HP, if I use the ritual sword talisman for the extra 20% damage while full HP. I chose to be female with this build. I love the look of the Black Knife Assassin set with an altered chest piece. The headpiece is an altered commoner's headband. If you are interested in the sliders of my character, click the info card in the top right. This build feels like the Swiss Army knife of Elden Ring builds. You will have an answer to all the problems Elden Ring throws at you. Loretta has a lot of magical resistance, which makes her a little harder with this build to fight. I also recommend that you fight Renala, Queen of the Full Moon, a little later on, because she's really hard to fight with this build. If there is any boss in the game that is a nightmare for you, it is Renala. You can't use the Carrion Regal Scepter until you reach level 60 in intelligence anyways, so fight her at a later point. Radagon is best fought with the Darkmoon Greatsword, so don't use any spells against him, since he can parry them. The main fighting style with this build is to buff the Darkmoon Greatsword and use the fully charged heavies to kill everything that opposes you. But you can always use one of the many spells to fully dominate any situation. I hope you have a lot of fun playing Elden Ring while using this build. If you liked the video, please consider subscribing, it helps my channel a lot. I wish you all a great day, and I'll see you next time.